Great, thank you, Javier. All right, we're going to turn to some questions that came in from audience members. Thank you. As a reminder, we may not get to all of them today, but we will answer every question, and you will receive that next week. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the webinar. So the first question is acknowledging the power and influence of our Board of Trustees and wanting to know more about how the board is recruited, how it's organized, and also for John and Nita, what have you taken into your lives what have you learned from the Board of Trustees and taken back in your lives? So why don't we start with organized and recruited. John, do you want to talk about this since you are our most recent nominating and governance chair?
Sure. We have 21 board members, positions for 21 board members. Board members are eligible to serve 2 3-year terms. Then we have term limits. That results in turnover on a regular basis, on an annual basis. So people cycle through. There are opportunities to bring new people on, which is a good thing. And we try to retain our connection with former board members as part of the Denver Foundation community. In this past year, what we were looking for, so as an example, we were looking for certain kinds of expertise, financial expertise, for example, and a couple other areas. So that those were things that we identified as priorities because people with that expertise were leaving the board, and we felt they were important. We look for a diverse group of board members representing the broad range of folks who live and work in this community. We look for people who've had some connection with the Denver Foundation, who understand what its mission is and how it works. That's not having that does not exclude one, but it certainly makes the transition into a board role an easier one for new board members. We also, by the way, have various committees that people can get involved in and serve on. That's kind of how a lot of people get their background, whether they're donor advisors, whether they are nonprofit organization board members or executive directors. We're going to have we have an impact committee that is made up of a large group of people, and this is a new committee that's coming up from outside the organization. So there are lots of ways to work your way into a relationship, an understanding of the foundation, and make sure you're really committed. We want people who are going to, that's the other criteria. Unlike some boards, this is a working board. We ask a lot of our board members of time and energy and commitment. So and that's really a key component. But I'd turn it over to Nita to add some more if she would.
John, I think you said it beautifully. I will probably add just a couple more things. There is a recruitment process that you just articulated, and there also are these other ways that board candidates have come through. Sometimes we have people from community that raise their hand and say, I'm interested. Sometimes we have communities that put forward candidates that they think would be great on our board. Sometimes there are staff members that are working intimately in communities that have recommendations about people that might be great candidates. So I think the ways in which a candidate can show up through the nominating and governance process varies quite a bit, but I do think it's a rich and needed way for that to happen. Sometimes it is through the community that we learn about the voices that would be powerful on the Denver Foundation board.
Thank you, Nita. One thing that I want to point out is internally we've talked about how establishing the framework is the first step, and the foundation still plans to be in learning mode and gathering information mode in these next couple of years as we build out these programs. So I'm going to ask Daisa to respond to a question that kind of related to the last question about Board of Trustees. It's asking how will community be engaged when it comes to funding decisions. Previously, we had committees that were linked to one of our program focus areas, and now we're going with a new approach. Desa, could you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So there are a variety of ways that community can be involved in volunteering for the Denver Foundation and making decisions about resources. From the community grants program perspective, we're going to be creating a new enmeshed committee that's not organized by issue area, which our previous committee members told us made them feel a little bit isolated. But it's going to be one large committee that'll, do some learning together, do some connecting together, do some work together. A portion of those committee members each grant cycle will have an opportunity to be very involved in reviewing grants, actually more involved than our previous iteration. They'll be able to read grants. They'll be able to make recommendations right alongside the staff, really mixing it up together. And so that's one way that folks can be involved in grant making. I mentioned our special project funds and our field of interest funds. Many of those have a smaller committee that helps make decisions about particular types of grants. And so if you have a particular area of interest and you see something on the website and you're like, maybe there's a place for me in decision making, we would love to hear from you. And another place that we haven't talked a lot about, the Denver Foundation has a whole body of work around scholarships. It's something that's very unique to the Denver Foundation, and is an amazing, amazing program that provides dozens and dozens and dozens of scholarships to over 1,000 youth across the community, and they're always looking for committee members to read for that and to help make decisions there. So lots of places to plug in, and people can feel free to just reach out to me directly if you have questions or ideas, or just want to talk about whether there's a place for you at TDF.
Jason, I'm going to stick with you. One is I think this is an easy question. Will strengthening neighborhoods continue?
Will strengthening neighborhoods continue? Yes, absolutely. We love that program. And for folks who aren't familiar with it, it's an opportunity for us to fund really great ideas at a neighborhood level, oftentimes not even associated with a 501c3 nonprofit, but help really grow impact in neighborhoods that sometimes turns into whole organizations and sometimes just does an amazing thing in communities. So absolutely, we'll be continuing that work.
Great. Here's another question. I'm gonna bring two together. So under this new framework, what is our work going to be for truth, reconciliation, and reparations? And another question about DAF donors supporting racial equity focused grant ranking. So Javier or Desa, I'm wondering if one of you could talk briefly about our reparations giving circle.
Sure, I'm happy to. This is a pretty amazing and exciting thing that happened at the foundation over the last year and a half. A group of donors came together, really focused on reparations, and did a lot of really strategic thinking about what an opportunity would look like for them to play that out in a way that was meaningful to the work the personal work that they were doing, as well as the work in community. And they've partnered with a group of people who make up an advisory council. They're providing grants and things that look like grants out to organizations, Black-led organizations in the community, and are continuing to grow in terms of their footprint and in terms of their impact. And so that's something we're really excited about and really excited about supporting.
Great. Here's a question. and this could go to any of the panelists, as an invitation to model how a change happens, can you provide 1 or 2 examples of the hardest parts of this process and how you move through those parts to maintain the focus on eliminating systemic racism?
Well, I'm happy to kickstart the conversation with the rest of the panel. I think one of the hardest parts of the process is not knowing what it means when you say we're going to ground our work in racial equity, not knowing exactly what that looks like operationally. I think conceptually people know what it means, but operationally, how will we behave as an organization with the grounding of racial equity? I think it's one of the toughest parts. So the ability to articulate what it looks like and how it changes what you're doing would be an important thing to do in the process pretty quickly so people have an understanding.
Great. I recall a moment from the trustee, one of the trustee discussions of the framework, where I think this is very common in board of directors when you're talking about equity, where you could start to go off the racial equity path and say, but what about this inequity? What about this inequity? And I think, I'd compliment Nita for playing a strong role in that, but to me, it was the ability to have honest, hard conversations when questions came up. Javier, would you like to talk a little bit about your experience in this and grounding? I think the ability to have conversations is something we struggle with, and something that you want to change about the foundation.
Absolutely, and it was Nita that really led us through that conversation with the board, and we've had that conversation on the staff side as well. And this certainly shouldn't be seen as an exclusionary focus at all. As I said earlier, in my mind, racial equity serves as a springboard to talk about inequity throughout all aspects of society. But there can be no doubt that from the founding of this country, the issues around systemic racism have really impeded our ability to live out the aspirations that this country was founded upon, that are in our founding documents. And so that's why it's so very important to be that foundational grounding on equity, but again, not to be seen through an exclusionary lens.
Great, thank you. We're getting a lot of very practical questions about the community grant making program and process. A lot of answers that I would love to be able to rattle off, such as what day will the new grant guidelines come out? Will your grant due dates change? Part of the reason why we're not ready to share that yet is because of this formation of the impact advisory group. Desa, could you want to give us any sort of idea about what that path is like and when folks can expect to hear from us?
Sure. And I know it's hard, and again, would invite folks to reach out to me and to our team. We're really happy to talk with you because we know that change looks and feels hard. So we want to make sure you're feeling as comfortable as possible. In terms of things like when are the guidelines going to be published? When is the grant deadline going to happen? We're still working on that. And part of it is because we're still trying to understand how we best streamline our process in a way that supports you and meets your feedback to us about the process looking different. So we're doing some backward planning right now. I can say from my best guess that we'll be having a deadline in kind of late summer-ish, early fall, like in that kind of August-y time period. So for those of you who have been part of the second cycle of grant making each year, we hope to be a little less disruptive if you still fit with the guidelines from a timing and a cash flow perspective. But the rest of it is a little bit uncertain. And so we'll be publishing that information as soon as we have it. We'll be blasting it out as soon as we have it. And again, really happy to talk with any of you collectively or individually about specific questions that you have.
Thanks, Dasa. Javier, we're getting a couple questions on two sides of related to DAFs, which is, could you talk a little bit about how the Community Foundation, the Denver Foundation's priorities play into our discretionary grant making, our relationship with donors, and their role in influencing grant making and investments from their DAFs?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to the deep partnership and the ability now to work even more seamlessly across the folks who have the deep community engagement and knowledge, and those that are working daily with our fund holders and philanthropy partners to elevate the value proposition. So the knowledge that the Denver Foundation has built over almost 100 years now doesn't stop where our endowment priority funding areas end. It's understanding the entire community and things that are happening across all different areas, subject matter areas, communities, neighborhoods, etc. So it's all of that information and powerful positioning that is available to our fund holders and our donor partners. So we want to be just much more intentional in providing that assistance to philanthropists who want to obviously make strategic and smart investments with their philanthropic resources. I think we're better equipped to do that now.
Great. I'm going to ask one last question, Javier, and I'm going to stay with you. And we're getting questions about how are we going to connect with people? How are we going to keep listening? How are we going to keep learning? What's our commitment to that?
Well, it's absolutely at the center of our operational plan for the strategic framework. You mentioned strengthening neighborhoods earlier. That's just one small example. But all of this has been made harder, obviously, in a virtual setting. And we've done our best to try to reach out to people and continue to stay in community with people in this virtual world. But I think all of us are anxious to stop staring at Zoom screens and be in community with one another. I know I certainly am. I absolutely will be back on my bike when it's not below zero outside again, which hopefully doesn't happen again soon. But I think that idea of going to where people are and not just inviting them into our new home at Casa Grande, which we absolutely will do, but it's going where people are, and frankly, speaking in the language that they feel comfortable speaking in. It's connecting at that level, I think, that will make us a much more strong organization, a much stronger organization, and will, at the end of the day, determine whether we have successfully implemented this vision that the board has laid out for us.
And surveys, lots of surveys, just to help Edgar and Illinois, but feel great.
Thank you. Let me, I'm going to wrap up with some what you can expect next. So first, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the questions. I know we weren't able to get to all of them, but we will respond to all of them in an email you will get. We'll send it to everyone that was invited to this webinar. It'll include a recording of the webinar and some video recordings of answers and some written recording of answers, but we will get to all of those. We thank you. Following this, like I said, you'll immediately receive a copy of the 2021 strategic framework, which is also on our website, so you can check your email. We welcome and encourage you to follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter. Those are easy to link to on our website, denverfoundation.org. And finally, I want to thank our panelists, our interpreters, and all of you for being such important parts of the Denver Foundation we thank you and we feel so honored to be able to work with you.